Well, hi there, everybody. Steve the Amateur Historian, coming to you from... Technically, I'm standing in Waterfront Park, but the crime I'm discussing is not Waterfront Park. In fact, when this crime happened, this was probably still mostly buildings. This park hadn't even been established yet, but my focus is in the area directly behind me. This is the NATO Parkway right here, right behind me. But back in the good old days, it was Front Avenue. And the story that I'm bringing you today came from a building that once stood in the area right across the street behind me. It's all parking now. A lot of buildings were demolished, especially in the middle part of the 20th century, specifically for parking. And it's likely a lot of these buildings a lot of these spaces that are no longer here had buildings at one time. This Front Avenue used to be lined with buildings, and specifically, according to the sources I found, it was on Front Avenue between Stark Street, which on the west side is Harvey Milk now, Harvey and Milk Street, which is right here, and Oak, which is right there. So it was right here, right smack dab in between the two. And there was a building here. It was described in the information I have as a commission house. But essentially what it was it was an office of the Southern Oregon Produce and Commission Company. Is that necessary? I guess it's a motorcycle. They're kind of allowed. They're allowed to be loud sometimes. But yeah, so a Southern Oregon Produce and Commission Company. And back in March of 1913, over 106 years ago, a man named Issac Bloom ran that office out of a building, again, right across the street here. And, in a place like that, he probably had a lot of people working for him. A lot of people come, a lot of people go. You gotta fire people sometimes. And one of the guys that Issac Bloom felt that he had to fire was an employee named James Hammond, who'd been fired, again, it's March 1913. He'd been fired months earlier. And there's very interesting cases of people who got fired from their job, murder cases, people who got fired from their job, and then it seems like they just went their own way for a couple of months, and then suddenly out of nowhere just came back in a blaze of glory. And some of these people were probably, a lot of people back then, you got fired from your job, it was because you were negligent on the job. A lot of them were alcoholics, which, you show up to work drunk, you sleep drunk, forget to wake up for work, and don't show up because you were drunk. A lot of dope fiends, as was the term back in the day. So a lot of people that lost their jobs because they were just messed up on some kind of substance or another. So you lose one job, it's probably going to be pretty hard for you to find another. So I can see a lot of these people getting fired from a job and then not being able to find one. They maybe, their wives leave them, their kids hate them, they lose their home because they have no money, and, a couple months go by and everything's just terrible. And in the end, you realize none of this would have happened if my boss didn't fire me. And I guess that's a good enough place, because I just realized I forgot to say it in the last clip, if there was a last clip. Anyway, that's the ground set for a new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So James Hammond, he's the individual that Issac Bloom dismissed from work months before in the establishment that would have been where this parking lot is now. And it gets to be March 12th, 1913. And James Bloom, who again has been gone from work for a couple of months, seems to have just wandered off and doing his own thing now. He randomly shows up at his old place of work here and demands to see Issac Bloom. Now, Hammond, claimed that, I don't know if this was also happening while he was working or if it was just something that was happening in the aftermath. He was fired. They kind of decided to make some fun of him behind his back now that he's down on his luck and off and gone. But Hammond claimed that, hearing it from people that he used to work with. So, firsthand from people that worked with him and Bloom, he claimed that he'd been told that Issac Bloom the term used was slurring him. So I don't know, it never says what nationality either one of them is, so I don't know if that meant, like, racial slurring of some kind, even though I think they were both white guys, so I don't know how that would fully work, but that's the term that was used in the newspaper, was that he was most angry because Bloom was slurring him behind his back. I almost want to say that means more that he was slandering him. Once he fired him, he was talking crap about Hammond. He was maybe, at least as far as Hammond felt, exaggerating things that he did. Maybe when he was explaining to other workers whatever it was that led to him firing Hammond felt that what he was hearing back from them wasn't jibing with what he said. So I think he was just mad that his old boss fired him and now was talking, shit about him behind his back. And the way toxic masculinity is, it is today. It would have been even more so back then. Guys, for the most part, they aren't really great at handling being treated like shit. They want to yell, they want to scream, they want to rant, they want to fight, they want to get even. And it seems like James Hammond was not an alternative to that notion. So he showed up at his old place of work, which would have been literally right here. Like, he may have been standing right where I'm standing. This could have been right where the building was. So Hammond, walks in, tells someone he demands to see Issac Bloom, who apparently is upstairs in his office. Demands that Issac Bloom comes down to see him. Guy goes upstairs, tells Bloom, "Hey, Crazy Hammond's here to talk to you. And, he wants you to go downstairs and meet him." And Bloom's like, "No, tell him to come up here." And Hammond refuses to go up. Seems to be some bickering, and finally he convinces Bloom to come out of his office and come downstairs and meet him. They come down, they apparently begin talking briefly, and then suddenly James Hammond pulls up a gun, shoots Issac Bloom. The bullet goes in behind his ear, went straight through his brain. And, you'd think something like that would kill him instantly. He actually survived for, I think, like 5 more hours before he passed away, but there was no way he was going to come out of something like that. And James Hammond, of course, split, and one of the reasons he might have split the scene here is because, according to his story, and of course this is what everybody says when they shoot somebody, is, "Well, I didn't mean to kill him, I just wanted to scare him, I wanted him to stop slurring me." I think that was his exact quote, "I wanted him to stop slurring me." And he claimed later on that his intent was to, like, shoot him in the shoulder to get even, because of course when someone, talks trash about you, the logical resolution is you bring a gun into your old place of business and shoot him in the shoulder and give him a disfiguring, probably painful for the rest of his life injury. One of those kind of injuries that, you probably get hooked on morphine for the rest of your life. So again, he claimed he didn't intend to shoot him and kill him, even though he shot him straight through the head. Through, near the ear, through the brain. Yeah, that sounds like the shoulder. Yeah, it sounds like an accident. He said, whatever he said. He said that, when he pulled the gun out, like it went off earlier, like he wanted to pull it up and shoot him, but like he pulled it up and it went off before he was ready. Sounds like a bunch of nonsense to me, but anyway, the shooting happened. He freaked. He bailed out of his business right around the corner, started running this way on Oak Street. The crime was, reported pretty quickly, so he's on the run, and he was chased for like 7 blocks. It was dramatic all through these city streets, and he was ultimately apprehended at 3rd and Ash, which is literally like right over here. So he made it a fairly good distance, considering he was being chased like almost immediately. However, now maybe this changes things, maybe it doesn't. another thing, and I don't know if this happened before or after he lost his job, James Hammond admitted to being what you'd call a morphine junkie, like I was talking about earlier. When people would, back in the days, a lot of people who lost their jobs, they were hooked on some substance or another. And James Hammond admitted to being on morphine. He claimed to have taken a bunch of morphine before going to confront Bloom. I don't know if he was doing that intentionally to make the confrontation easier, or if he did it and under the throes of morphine he decided, I'm gonna go get even. But it's also important to understand that, if this guy was on morphine at the time, did that affect his, actions during the shooting? Does that explain why he didn't do it the way he thought he was going to do? He still hit the guy pretty perfect, so I don't know. But he ultimately, that played a part in his trial, the fact that this guy was jacked up when it happened. So would he have done it otherwise? So that made getting a first-degree murder conviction almost impossible, and he actually ultimately agreed to plead guilty to a second-degree one that saved him from the gallows, essentially. And so he ended up getting a life sentence for what he did. However, he wasn't the only person that got, screwed by this murder. There were other people that actually went down. There was a woman who I believe, I don't remember exactly where she lived. I think she lived on Front Avenue, and she was known to be, as you would say, a morphine dealer. And it was believed that she was the person that Hammond was obtaining his, drugs from. So she got into a lot of trouble. They apprehended her, and she said, I'm a morphine user. I don't sell it, though. I've never given it to anybody, which, maybe she didn't, but somebody who is guilty of, selling it to people would say that, too. So she ended up doing, I think, pretty significant sentence. Because the presumption was still, oh yeah, whatever, no, you dealt this morphine to this guy, and under the influence of that morphine, he killed another human being. But beyond that, James Hammond had recently obtained the weapon, which shows premeditation. He got it right before the shooting, and he obtained it from a place that was located on Pine and 3rd, which is right behind me. Now, the second-hand shop, that was where James Hammond obtained his weapon. He obtained his handgun from a second-hand shop that was located based on the address just south of 3rd and Pine right here. So it would have been just south of this intersection. So it would be right about the middle of where this building/parking garage is located. That's where the second-hand shop would have been. And the problem with this whole situation, because you think it's a second-hand shop, he can, people sell all kinds of stuff at second-hand shops and merchant shops and things like that. But in this case, you're talking about a second-hand shop where they sold a weapon to a guy that then used it to kill his boss. That's almost as significant a thing as the, drugs that James Hammond obtained wherever he obtained them from. So it was ultimately established that the second-hand shop, which again would have been right here back in the day, the proprietor of the second-hand shop didn't have the proper license to sell these, to sell guns in general. He did not have the license to do that, so they shouldn't have been doing that at all. And, the main proprietor tried to claim that he didn't sell it to him. One of my family members who doesn't really know the law as well was working in my store, and they must have sold it to him unknowingly, and that was, revealed to be a bunch of nonsense. But, the guy had to protect himself best he could. But, the guy didn't have a license to sell a weapon that was sold out of his shop to a guy that killed somebody. And it's crazy, he got busted. He ended up, I think, going to jail, and definitely losing his store, and something that was printed in the newspapers that was noticed, because you think, we're in Old Town. We're still pretty much kind of in the North End, Portland's notorious North End, where there was pretty much any business in this area back then had some crooked thing going on the side. And they noted that you know, a lot of merchant shops and secondhand stores, they had guns in their window. Like, they advertised them hard. You know, they put them out there for all to see. And then when this one proprietor who sold James Hammond the weapon he used got busted for not having a license and, you know, ended up going to jail, all of a sudden they noticed all these guns that had been in these windows of all these second-hand shops all of a sudden all got removed and taken down. And, you know, it seemingly just disappeared. All of a sudden these guns were just gone because people suddenly realized, they either realized, like, we're going to get in trouble for something similar to that too, and then we're screwed, so we have to either get rid of these or we need to hide them somewhere till, you know, the heat dies down, and then maybe we can bring him back. I guess it just depends what level of criminal you are at that time, but I thought that was really interesting that they said, you know, all the guns in the secondhand shop windows have suddenly disappeared in the aftermath of this particular case. So, you know, it wasn't just James Hammond that, you know, was drastically affected by this. It was pretty much everybody who helped him, you know, in some degree. Whoever helped him get the drugs he had and whoever helped him get the gun he had. They also paid a heavy price for the murder of Issac Bloom at his establishment, which would, yeah, be just the other side of this building. I kind of did a full circle. But yeah, there's more parking lot space. It would have been, yeah, just the other side of this building. And that is the story of the murder of Issac Bloom in 1920 Front Avenue, Portland. I had to pause for a moment because, as usual in this area, some kind of sketchy guy started following me, so I'm like, alright, well, I'm just gonna depart from this area. I think I lost him too. I'm just being followed by people today. So anyway, gang, as always, remember to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon if you so desire. And all that said, till next time, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian, and I'll see you next time.